Hey friend, welcome to True Crime Whispers Before Sleep. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy true crime stories told in a calm and relaxing way, you'll feel right at home. Before you get too cozy, tap that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chilling case. And if you feel like it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's story. They came dressed like gentlemen, pressed suits, polished shoes, briefcases in hand. Nobody in London's exclusive Mayfair district would have guessed that behind those crisp collars and calculated smiles was a crew of seasoned criminals preparing to pull off one of Britain's most audacious bank heists. It wasn't just about money, it was about precision, power, access, and a man on the inside. April 1975. The world's attention was elsewhere. But in the shadows of Davies Street, under the velvet quiet of London's elite quarter, a team of robbers had their eyes set on the Bank of America. They weren't kicking in doors or waving guns. No, this was different. They were slipping through side entrances, copying keys, watching from ceilings, and cracking codes like ghosts in the vault. And yet, what they didn't know was that someone else was watching them. This is the real story of how a humble electrician turned trusted insider, of how one of the largest banks in the world was nearly emptied from the inside out, of how a mistake, a drop, and a whisper changed everything. This is the untold account of the Mayfair bank job, where silence was louder than sirens. Now let's go back to where it all began. It started quietly. No alarms, no chaos, just footsteps echoing softly on marble floors. April 1975. The Bank of America branch in London's Mayfair was a symbol of prestige. Nestled in one of the city's wealthiest districts, it wasn't just a bank, it was a fortress. Or so they thought. That afternoon, a group of well-dressed men stepped through the doors like clients with appointments. They weren't here for deposits or withdrawals. They were casing the place, calmly and methodically. They weren't thugs from back alleys. They were professionals, polished, calculated, invisible. Behind their smooth appearances hid blueprints, inside knowledge, and something most robbers only dream of, a key to the vault, and the man who made it possible. His name was Stuart Buckley, 26 years old, fresh out of prison, and far from reformed. A wiry man with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. Officially, he was just an electrician, hired to fix the phone lines. Unofficially, he was the inside man. His cell in prison had been immaculate. He was the kind of inmate who folded his bed sheets like a hotel maid and scrubbed the floor beneath his bunk. But beneath the tidiness was a brain constantly ticking, measuring, planning, watching. After serving a sentence for handling stolen goods, Buckley didn't return to a life of petty crime. He had bigger ambitions, smarter ambitions. He used his experience in electronics, skills that let him reroute phone lines, bypass security systems, and even tap conversations, to land a job at the Bank of America in Mayfair. No one bothered to run a background check. No one asked questions. He was just another worker with a tool belt and a quiet demeanor. But Buckley had something far more valuable than tools: access. And soon, a conversation over a pint at a South London pub would turn that access into something dangerous. Some crimes begin with a plan, others begin with a drink. South London, a smoky pub, the kind of place where laughter fades fast when the wrong names are spoken. It was here that Stuart Buckley crossed paths with an old associate, Frank Maple. Maple wasn't some street-level thief. He was a criminal tactician, respected in underground circles, feared in others. If you were planning something big in Britain, Maple's name came up. And if he was interested, things got serious. Buckley, casually sipping his pint, mentioned his new job. A bank job, not a robbery, a literal job inside a bank. Bank of America. Mayfair branch, wires, phones, vaults. Maple's eyes didn't widen. He simply listened, and then asked one question. "Do you have keys?" Buckley nodded, maybe too casually. Not just keys to Mayfair, keys to multiple Bank of America branches across London. He was the trusted electrician, the man who could come and go without suspicion. To Maple, this wasn't just luck. It was gold, a blueprint falling into his lap. A way in that didn't require explosives or threats, just patience, precision, and the right people. And so the idea was born. They wouldn't storm the bank. They'd slip into it, quietly, elegantly, from the inside. Maple, now fully invested, began to draw the lines of the operation. He knew what he needed: a tight-knit crew, each with specific skills, men who didn't ask questions, men who never flinched, and at the center of it all, Buckley. The vault wasn't just a steel door, it was a puzzle. But with Buckley's knowledge, Maple's leadership, and the right hands turning the right tools, it could be solved. This wasn't going to be a robbery. It was going to be a work of art. Frank Maple didn't deal in amateurs. If this job was going to work, he needed more than just bravado. He needed masters of their craft. Men with steady hands, silent mouths, and the nerve to dance with danger. So Maple started making calls. Jimmy Laughlin was the first name on the list. Maple's neighbor from Kingston upon Thames and his unofficial chief of staff. A man with a reputation for knowing how to assemble a team like a general selects soldiers. Strategic, loyal, and ruthless if need be. Laughlin wasn't flashy. He was surgical. His job? To vet the rest. To pick specialists like chess pieces, each playing a different role, but all moving toward the same goal. Next came Leonard Minchin, known across London's underworld as Johnny the Bosch. The nickname? It wasn't a joke. It was a nod to his surgical skills and cold, technical mindset. With a face that looked straight out of a German mugshot, Minchin was a legend in certain circles. Safe-cracking was his gift, his obsession. Rumor had it he once opened a vault with 2 bent coat hangers and a stopwatch. He'd been in and out of prison more times than he could count. Armed robbery, high-stakes burglary, impersonation. He didn't just know how to get in. He understood the mechanics of security like a watchmaker understands gears. If anyone could get through the double-dialed vault door at the Bank of America, it was Minchin. Then came the wild card, Peter Coulson from Southgate. No convictions, no prison record, just whispers and winks. To the system, Coulson was clean. But on the street, he was known as the Lucky Thief. A charismatic playboy with the instincts of a fox and the hands of a pickpocket. He'd pulled off scams, robberies, and cons since he was a teenager, and somehow always walked away untouched. Maple liked him, not because he was slick, but because he'd never been caught. A clean record made Coulson the perfect face if things ever got sticky. By the time Maple, Laughlin, Minchin, Coulson, and Buckley sat together, plans already unfolding, London's most refined heist team was quietly forming. They weren't just criminals, they were craftsmen. And what they were about to attempt would be criminal architecture at its finest. Stuart Buckley was more than just a man on the inside. He was the blueprint. While the others planned from the outside, Buckley walked the hallways of the Bank of America with a screwdriver in hand and a master plan in his head. He wasn't just an electrician anymore. He was invisible, trusted, familiar, a face no one questioned. By now, Buckley had something that even the most skilled burglars would envy: keys. Keys to the Mayfair branch, keys to the Bank of America's other London branches, keys that unlocked doors, cabinets, service tunnels, and eventually, opportunity. He fixed wiring, checked phones, slipped through back entrances. No security guards followed him. No managers hovered nearby. He was left alone to do his job. And in that silence, he studied everything. The vault, however, was a different story. It was protected by 2 separate dials, a double combination system. One code was held by the bank manager, the other by the chief cashier. Neither knew the other's sequence. No matter how many keys Buckley had, without those numbers, the vault was still a sealed tomb. But Buckley was patient. He began frequenting a small cafe near the bank, just across the street. It became his unofficial office. There, over weak tea and stronger cigarettes, he met regularly with Laughlin and Minchin. They planned meticulously. Every light switch, every guard shift, every customer pattern. Buckley gave them the entire layout, times, entry points, staff schedules, even where the vault sat tucked behind its iron gate. Still, the lock remained the final barrier. And then, Buckley found a crack. The receptionist. She was polite, soft-spoken, and entirely unaware she was about to become part of something far bigger. Buckley, using charm and sleight of hand, befriended her. Small talk led to coffee. Coffee led to trust. And one afternoon, as they shared conversation behind the reception desk, Buckley accidentally knocked her keyring to the floor. He apologized, picked them up, smiled. But he hadn't just picked them up. He'd pressed them into a wad of plasticine tucked in his palm, copying the grooves in perfect detail. That moment, unnoticed and seemingly innocent, was the one that changed everything. With those impressions, the gang could now replicate the gate key to the vault area. One more door down. And the rest? Still waiting behind 6 inches of steel. But the cracks were beginning to show. While the gang was busy planning their silent break-in, someone else had started listening. London's underworld has rules, but it also has leaks. A whisper, a name dropped at the wrong pub, a bartender with a brother on the force. No one knows exactly who tipped them off, but the signal reached the right ears. Scotland Yard's intelligence branch, Unit C11, was alerted. They were told something big was coming, a major heist, and that names like Minchin and Laughlin were in play. To C11, that wasn't just a red flag, it was a full siren. Unit C11 didn't storm doors or flash badges. They watched, waited, studied movements like hunters in the tall grass. And soon enough, they spotted it, a pattern. C11 began tailing Leonard Minchin, the safecracker. It didn't take long before they observed him meeting regularly at a small cafe behind the Bank of America's city branch on Cannon Street. There, Minchin met with Buckley and Laughlin. The men spoke quietly, moved cautiously, spent hours seated without food, scribbling notes and folding napkins into crude vault shapes. The Yard didn't know all the details yet, but to seasoned eyes, it was clear something was being planned, and it involved a bank. Their mistake? They focused on the wrong one. All eyes turned toward the Bank of America's Cannon Street branch, not the Davies Street branch in Mayfair, where Buckley was truly embedded. The gang had, without even realizing it, sent the authorities looking in the wrong direction. But time was still ticking. Because while Scotland Yard's surveillance kept watch over the wrong location, the real job was almost ready to begin. Friday, October 25th, 1974, 6 p.m. The sun dipped below the rooftops of Mayfair. The streets began to clear. Suits walked home, doors locked, and inside the Bank of America on Davies Street, the vault was sealed shut for the weekend. But for one group of men, it was showtime. Buckley had done his part. The keys worked. The path was clear. And the alarm system? Outdated. Laughable. The kind of setup that relied on a gramophone needle to trigger a police alert. Buckley had already explained how to silence it, and they did, quickly. Under cover of night, the gang slipped inside. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was a surgical strike. Every second mattered. Every tool had a purpose. They reached the vault door, cold steel, 7 inches thick, 2 massive dials, 1 shot. They began drilling. The plan was as precise as a surgeon's cut. Use electromagnetic presses to hold the drill steady on the left and right locks. Penetrate just deep enough. Insert feelers. Decode the tumblers. Crack the sequence. But things went wrong, fast. The steel was thicker than they'd expected. The drill bit overheated. Sparks flew. Time dragged. They didn't panic. Not yet. They improvised. "Cool it down," someone muttered. And in an act of pure desperation, one of them grabbed a can of Coca-Cola. They poured it on the bit to cool the metal. Fizzing, bubbling, hissing. But it wasn't enough. The drill snapped. Silence. Then curses. Frustration began to boil. Weeks, months of planning now sat melting at their feet like a puddle of cola and broken metal. They tried again. Another bit. More pressure. Sweat. Time was running out. They weren't even halfway through the lock, and dawn wasn't far off. They faced the unthinkable. They had to abandon the job. The robbers, tense and defeated, slipped out the way they came in, leaving behind cola stains, broken bits of steel, and the faint scent of failure. When bank officials opened the vault room the following Monday morning, what they found was surreal. A pool of soda, scorched drill tips, and a vault that hadn't given an inch. They called the police, but the response? Lukewarm. It was logged as an attempted burglary, nothing more. No full investigation, no serious alerts, just another file in a crowded drawer. What no one realized was that these weren't amateurs. They were still watching, still planning. And now, they were even more determined, because they weren't going to try again. They were going to finish what they started. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries happen by accident. For Stuart Buckley, that moment came not with drills or keys, but with a dropped screwdriver. Weeks had passed since the failed attempt. The gang had gone quiet, publicly. But behind the scenes, they were regrouping, rebuilding confidence, waiting for the right crack in the armor. Then it came. Buckley had been sent to complete a routine wiring job inside the Mayfair branch, right above the vault. To do it, he had to climb into the false ceiling, crawling through fiberglass and ductwork like a ghost in the walls. He maneuvered above the vault, screwdriver in hand, threading wires, shifting insulation. Then it slipped. The screwdriver fell through a polystyrene ceiling tile, punching a tiny hole in the surface. Buckley froze. He crouched, peered through the gap. And what he saw was gold. Directly beneath him, just a few feet down, the bank manager and the chief cashier were unlocking the vault, one dial each. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just watched and memorized. Every hand movement, every twist, every pause between numbers. He wasn't just seeing the lock turn. He was witnessing the secret sequence that guarded millions. In that moment, Buckley wasn't an electrician. He was an infiltrator, and he'd just found the blueprint to the unbreakable door. Later, he returned, this time prepared. Hidden above the vault again, he used a magnifying glass, or maybe a lens salvaged from an old camera. Some say he jotted the sequence onto a scrap of paper. Others believe he carved it into memory. Either way, when the door creaked open below, he had the code. This changed everything. The team no longer needed drills, explosives, or patience. They now had the combination. Buckley came down from the ceiling with something no criminal could buy. Direct access to one of the most secure vaults in the country. And this time, they wouldn't fail. The first attempt had shaken them. They'd tasted failure, bitter and cold. But now, with Buckley's discovery, the gang wasn't just back on track. They were supercharged. That moment in the ceiling rewrote the entire playbook. What had once required brute force could now be done with finesse. No more drilling. No more improvising with fizzy drinks. They had the codes. All they needed was timing and silence. When Buckley told Maple and the others what he'd seen, what he now knew, they didn't erupt in celebration. They nodded, focused. "It's time," Maple said, voice low. For criminals like them, emotion didn't belong in the planning room, only strategy did. And now, that strategy was cleaner, tighter, and more dangerous than ever. The new plan was surgical. Buckley would give them access. He had the keys to the side door. He knew the schedule, the comings, the goings, the cleaners, the hours where silence ruled the building. He knew which nights the vault was left untouched. The others would bring the tools, not for breaking in, but for carrying out. Duffel bags, gloves, masks, radios, precision over chaos. They even hired additional help, men to stand watch, coordinate exits, and stall any accidental interruptions. Every second was budgeted, every movement rehearsed. This time there would be no rushing, no loud tools, no panic. Just a group of professionals, slipping into a vault they now understood better than the bank's own employees. To an outsider, it might have seemed like suicide, returning to the scene of a failed crime. But to this gang, it was unfinished business. They weren't scared. They were ready. And with the vault's secret now exposed, London was about to witness one of the boldest bank heists in British history. Thursday, April 24th, 1975, 6:05 p.m. As London's elite settled into dinner reservations and Scotch lounges, the Bank of America in Mayfair closed its doors for the night. Staff left with briefcases and tired sighs. The vault was sealed, the lights dimmed, the streets outside quieted. To the world, it was just another Thursday. To 5 men, it was now or never. In the growing shadows, they moved like ghosts, calm, unseen, dressed like they belonged. The plan was simple. The execution, anything but. Buckley unlocked the side entrance with the same nonchalance he used during his workday. No gloves, no mask. He wasn't worried about cameras. There were barely any. This was 1975, and security was still more fiction than fact. The crew entered in silence. Minchin took point, eyes fixed on the vault. The safecracker's hands didn't shake. He'd waited his whole life for a vault like this. Double dial, thick steel, a real challenge. Only now, thanks to Buckley, there was no guessing. The numbers were in his pocket. Coulson, the lucky thief, handled the bags. He checked the layout, kept count of time. Every second had to be accounted for. Laughlin secured the perimeter, watching exits, listening for footsteps that never came. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just listened. And Maple, the architect, stood still, coat draped, hands in pockets, watching, thinking, always thinking. Then the moment arrived. Minchin approached the vault. He entered the first combination, the manager's sequence. A pause, a click. Then the second, the cashier's numbers. Another click, a hiss of old metal. And just like that, the vault began to open. No alarms, no resistance, just a heavy, almost reluctant groan of steel surrendering. Inside, treasure. Rows of safety deposit boxes stacked like secrets. Inside those boxes, wealth, jewelry, cash, documents. Some said £8 million worth, the equivalent of over £70 million today. They worked quickly. Crowbars popped boxes. Gloves scooped up necklaces. Diamonds, gold coins, bearer bonds. Anything untraceable. Anything that could disappear into a coat pocket and never be seen again. They weren't greedy, they were efficient. There was no shouting, no smashing, only breathing, and the soft clink of wealth being liberated from cold metal. For nearly 2 hours, the gang owned the vault. Then, as planned, they left. Bags full, shoes silent, nerves sharp. They locked the vault behind them, closed the side door, and disappeared into the night. No alarms rang, no patrol cars showed up. There were no broken windows, no hostages, no fingerprints. It was as if nothing happened. But by the time the sun rose, history had been rewritten. Morning came. Staff filed into the Bank of America's Mayfair branch, same as always. Suits, briefcases, routine. Until someone reached the vault. The door was shut, the combination dials untouched. Everything looked normal, until they opened it. Inside, there was nothing normal about what they found. Dozens of safety deposit boxes, empty, cleanly opened, not smashed or forced, selected, precise, professional. Panic settled in slowly like fog. Managers double-checked logs. Security walked in circles. Phones rang up the chain to headquarters. Then came the number. £8 million. Gone. Today, that's more than £70 million. Vanished into thin air without a single gunshot, footprint, or fingerprint. The reaction? Explosive. The media jumped first. Headlines hit like thunder. Mayfair Bank looted in daring inside job. One of Britain's biggest heists, and no one saw a thing. Cameras gathered outside the branch. Reporters shouted through the lobby doors. Politicians asked how such a high-profile institution, in one of the safest parts of London, could be stripped to the bones without anyone hearing a whisper. Scotland Yard scrambled. C11 was furious. They'd had eyes on the suspects. They were so close, but they'd focused on the wrong branch, the wrong timeline. And now, the criminals were gone, and the money was with them. The hunt was on, but it was starting from behind the curve. The public? They were hooked. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a mystery. Who were these men? How did they get in? And how, in the middle of Mayfair, did they vanish? The gang didn't brag. They didn't flaunt their wealth. They disappeared like shadows. But the silence wouldn't last forever, because the cracks were coming. And somewhere, someone was going to talk. For a while, it looked like they had gotten away with it. No arrests, no sightings, no leaks. The public called it genius. The media called it invisible. And behind closed doors, Scotland Yard called it unacceptable. C11, the elite intelligence unit that had been watching this crew for weeks, was now reeling from its failure to connect the dots in time. They had eyes on Minchin, on Laughlin, even on Buckley. But they had assumed the target was Cannon Street, not Davies Street. They missed the hit by 3 miles. Now, with the press breathing down their necks and the public demanding answers, they turned up the heat. Surveillance teams were reactivated. Old footage, what little existed, was reviewed. Cafes were revisited. Tapped phones, tailed cars, long hours in smoke-filled rooms piecing together the movement of every known associate. And finally, cracks began to show. It wasn't anything loud. It was a detail here, a misstep there. A surveillance officer remembered seeing Buckley meeting with Minchin at a cafe behind the Mayfair branch, not the city branch. A subtle but crucial shift. Bank employees remembered Buckley's quiet presence, his constant wiring work, his unrestricted access. He had always seemed too efficient, too independent. Questions turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned to patterns. Soon, Buckley's name was back on their board, this time with a red circle around it. Meanwhile, the gang, feeling the growing pressure, stayed low. There were no celebrations, no shopping sprees. They understood what they'd done. They'd stolen millions. But they'd also triggered one of the most intense manhunts in British history. And now, the circle was beginning to close. No matter how perfect the plan, someone always slips. And for this crew, It wasn't the job that gave them away. It was what came after. With pressure mounting and every known associate under watch, Scotland Yard made their move. They started with the weakest link. Stuart Buckley had kept his cool for months, but the moment his name resurfaced in internal memos, surveillance teams were back on him, watching his movements, listening to conversations, even noting how often he returned to the bank, as if trying to maintain an illusion of normalcy. He was still working, still wiring, still pretending none of it had ever happened. But then came a call, a message, something small, something out of place. It was enough. They picked him up, and once Buckley was in custody, the interrogation began. Hours in a small room, questions circling, statements repeated, faces shown, timelines confronted. Buckley didn't confess, not right away. But the police already had enough to hold him. They just needed to build the rest. From there, things moved quickly. Jimmy Laughlin, once invisible, had been under quiet surveillance. Now he was tailed more aggressively, observed at pubs, watched meeting contacts in alleyways. When police saw him rendezvous with Leonard Minchin, again, they acted, arrested. Each man brought in separately, each with their own story, their own alibi. But as Scotland Yard built the timeline, the pressure grew. Alibis cracked, patterns overlapped. Evidence began to form, not fingerprints or CCTV, but timelines, key access, and confessions they didn't think anyone had overheard. They were connected. They had motive. And now, they had momentum. But the crown jewel, the true organizer, Frank Maple, remained untouched. Because if Buckley was the key, Maple was still the ghost in the system. Frank Maple was never loud. He didn't wave guns or bark orders. He didn't leave a trail of bruised witnesses or flashy purchases. He planned in whispers. He moved in shadows, and when his crew began to crumble, he vanished like smoke. While Buckley, Laughlin, and Minchin sat in cold rooms under fluorescent lights, Maple was already gone, days ahead of the heat, maybe even weeks. He knew how this worked. The moment someone was picked up, the walls would start to close, so he did what he always planned to do. He slipped away. Some said he fled to Spain, others whispered about South America, a beach in Panama, a quiet ranch in Colombia, maybe even a new name and a new face. No one knew for sure, not even his crew. There were no phone calls, no goodbyes. He left clean. To Scotland Yard, he became a myth, the mastermind who pulled the strings, watched the vault door open, and then disappeared before they could even say his name out loud. They had pieces of the operation, evidence, suspects, even a few loose confessions. But without Maple, the full puzzle never snapped into place. In the pubs and prison cells of London's underworld, Frank Maple became a ghost story. You know that Mayfair job? That was Maple's gig. They say he planned it for a year, left the country before the first arrest, never even touched the money himself. And maybe that was true, because the thing about masterminds, they never get their hands dirty. They just make sure everyone else does. The arrests made headlines. Buckley, Laughlin, Minchin, Coulson. Their faces, some familiar to police, others complete mysteries, flashed across newspapers under bold, screaming headlines. The Mayfair heist gang caught. The public thought the story was over. But inside the courtroom, behind polished benches and heavy wooden doors, the real story started to unravel. Evidence was presented, some of it strong, some barely holding weight. Bank logs, testimonies, character references, surveillance notes. Yet there was one glaring hole in it all. No one ever found the money. No diamonds, no bearer bonds, no stacks of cash. Nothing to truly pin the heist on anyone, except Stuart Buckley, the trusted insider whose access and timing made him the perfect scapegoat. He was painted as the traitor, the weak link, the man who sold loyalty for a suitcase of cash. Minchin, Laughlin, and Coulson portrayed as the muscle, skilled, no doubt, but not the masterminds. And the true architect? Frank Maple's name never crossed a lawyer's lips, not once. Whether by legal strategy or by silent agreement, those who understood how the world really worked heard the silence louder than any testimony. Prosecutors pieced together what they could: timelines, movement maps, key access logs. They crafted a story convincing enough for the public, but full of deliberate gaps. Sentences were handed down, time was served, but the truth? It never fully came out. Behind the scenes, rumors whispered about quiet deals, promises made to Buckley for his silence, hints that Minchin had withheld critical details, and that Laughlin knew better than to say anything that couldn't be unsaid. It was justice, in carefully edited form, And out beyond the courthouse walls, in the streets and back rooms of London, the real story kept breathing. Hidden, buried, but not forgotten, years passed. The Bank of America's Mayfair branch closed its doors. The vault was dismantled. New businesses rose over old secrets. The heist faded from headlines, but never from memory. Because legends don't live on paper, they live in whispers, in pubs, in prison yards, in stories traded like currency. A perfect crime, almost. Stuart Buckley, the electrician who crossed a line for fortune, served his sentence and disappeared into obscurity. Some say he fled the country. Others claim he now builds radios quietly by a windy coastal town. Jimmy Laughlin, the logistics man, returned to a life without celebration, speaking less, trusting no one, drinking more. Leonard Minchin, Johnny the Bosch, aged into silence, carrying the full knowledge of how he cracked that vault without ever sharing it. Not in prison, not after. Peter Coulson, the lucky thief, truly lived up to his name. No convictions, no hard evidence. Some say he retired to the south of France. Others swear he's still in London, wearing new suits, playing a different game. And Frank Maple, the ghost, the architect. Interpol may have written his name on a list, but no one ever made an arrest. No photographs, no fingerprints, no flight logs, just silence. Some believe he's dead, others believe he's alive, sipping black coffee on a sunlit balcony, somewhere far beyond London's reach. What's undeniable is this: the Mayfair bank heist wasn't just about what was stolen. It was about how it was stolen. It was a message that patience beats violence, that silence outlasts alarms, and that real legends, they don't get caught. They vanish, leaving stories behind that never fully close. If this story gripped you, subscribe to the Criminal Dossier, because next time, we'll take you inside the mind of a man who stole 40 million pounds and walk straight out the front door. You won't want to miss it.